قيما لينذر بأسا شديدا من لدنه ويبشر المؤمنين الذين يعملون الصالحات أن لهم أجرا حسنا ماكثين فيه أبدا وينذر الذين قالوا اتخذ الله ولدا ما لهم به من علم ولا لآبائهم كبرت كلمة تخرج من أفواههم إن يقولون إلا كذبا فلعلك باخع نفسك على آثارهم إن لم يؤمنوا بهذا الحديث أسفا إنا جعلنا ما على الأرض زينة لها لنبلوهم أيهم أحسن عملا وإنا لجاعلون ما عليها صعيدا جرزا أم حسبت أن أصحاب الكهف والرقيم كانوا من آياتنا عجبا إذ أوى الفتية إلى الكهف فقالوا ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا فضربنا على آذانهم في الكهف سنين عددا ثم بعثناهم لنعلم أي الحزبين أحصى لما لبثوا أمدا نحن نقص عليك نبأهم بالحق إنهم فتية آمنوا بربهم وزدناهم هدى وربطنا على قلوبهم إذ قاموا فقالوا ربنا رب السماوات والأرض لن ندعو من دونه إلها لقد قلنا إذا شططا هؤلاء قومنا اتخذوا من دونه آلهة لولا يأتون عليهم بسلطان بين فمن أظلم ممن افترى على الله كذبا.
Okay, so the first question we'll start with, and what we'll do is we'll ask the question, then we'll work our way down the panel. Okay, so the first question was, how did you get into Huffadh / what sparked the interest? Jawad, can you go first?
والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Well, I would say the most important thing, or the most significant factor for me, was not any effort that I made particularly, but it was simply the contribution of my parents. And this is something that, when I came to the UK, I found very surprising. So I was born in London. I lived in the UK for 6 years, and then I moved to Saudi for 9 years, and then I came back here, and I've been here for the past 5 or 6 years. And when I was in Saudi, and even throughout my childhood, my parents always kept the Quran playing in the background. If we were in the car, they would have Quran playing instead of any LBC radio or music or something like that. It was just Quran. The discussions about Quran, they engrossed me in the Quran like that. And I found that it wasn't just them sending me to a madrasa and then expecting me to develop some kind of relationship with the Quran, but it was the actual efforts that they made. My mom, every single morning, she gets up and she does Quran with my sisters, from before Fajr sometimes after Fajr until they have to go to school. My mom put that effort in, and my dad as well, and that was what sparked my initial, you could say, help for the Quran, all because of my parents.
So, similar to Jawad, my not interest but sort of the affiliation with the Quran started at a younger age, and that was mostly due to my parents, may Allah reward them, because they taught me the Quran, and as Jawad said, we would always have it playing, and I remember as a child, trying to read along and sort of imitate the qaris that we have on those cassette things. And I remember my dad, he would join in with me just to encourage me and to sort of foster that love for the Quran. And And then since then, my journey, I mean, it's the same as like a lot of in this country, from a young age, starting madrasa at the local mosque, and then throughout the years, so you memorize more and more, and eventually become a habit.
But I prefer to speak about how do you make relationship with the Quran rather than speak about myself, because make relationship with the Quran, this is the most important thing that the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam say. Quran يقول لصاحب say to his friend. So if you are friend of Al-Quran, how would be the friend of Al-Quran? The friend of Quran, as I am, when we be friend of the human, when be friend for a human, I am gonna try to stand with him in sadness moments. I am gonna try to help them in difficult situations. I'm gonna try to do my best to make him happy. And this what the Quran do for his friend. So how can you build this relationship? Try to stick with the Quran in your life. How can you do that without bending the Quran? Try to stay the majority of your time with the Quran, with reading, with knowing what Al-Quran, what the message inside Al-Quran.
Just to follow with what the Sheikh was saying, every single one of us has something else, has a different situation and different circumstance. Alhamdulillah, me and Sahib and the others that we were brought up with the Quran. That our parents put us in the madrasa since a young age, our parents sat with us and helped us. Not everyone is like that. Everyone has a different circumstance. Perhaps that you weren't raised that way as well. Perhaps that you have a different situation. But at the end of the day, the thing that should spark your interest in the Quran is, as the Shaykh said, your relationship with the Quran itself. The Quran is the jewel. It's like the thing that we are the most precious of. Like they have a saying in English, the apple of our eye. And that's what the Quran is for Muslims. It is the apple of our eye. It's the thing that we're most proud of. And with the hifz, you get so many rewards for reading the Quran. You read it so much more, you get all that reward. The status of a hafid is higher than the status of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the best thing about being a hafid is that you get that connection with the Quran. Just imagine being able to sit there, you don't even need to look at the Quran. And you can just read, and you can read non-stop, and you can read perfectly. And then a high level than that, you can understand and connect with the Quran. That should be your primary motivation and reason for wanting to do the hifz of the Quran.
How did you deal with setbacks in memorization?
How do I deal with setbacks in memorization? You guys might have seen a very popular clip that went around. I think it was by Yahya, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's his name. But he was talking about how having the Quran is not an extra thing on your plate, but it makes your plate bigger. And there's actually a concept behind this. Can any of you define to me, we discussed it the other day, what barakah means? What is barakah?
To be able to do more with less.
To be able to do more with less. Beautiful. So that's what the Quran does. كتاب أنزلناه إليك مباركا ليدبروا آياته ويتذكر أولو الألباب. The Quran is a blessed book. When it was sent down on the month of Ramadan, it beautified the month of Ramadan. When it was sent down on the Prophet, ﷺ, he became Imam al-Anbiya. When it was sent down on a night, it became the night of blessing, the night of decree, or the night of power, Laylatul Qadr. And when it's sent down on mankind, it has the exact same effect. In that if you integrate the Quran into your everyday life, every single day you recite the Quran. And when I say every single day, I mean a day doesn't go by without you reciting the Quran in that day. It's not sufficient to say that I have too many things going on for me, I can't do the Quran. Or I can't find time in the day to do the Quran. The Quran, if you truly believe it is the blessed book, then it will create more time for you in the day. Right? So that's what he meant if you saw that clip, by expanding your plate. It allows you to do more things rather than be an extra thing on your plate. So that was the first sort of realization I had to come to when it comes to Huffadh and memorization. Is that I'm not just doing it because I'm trying to bang in some numbers, I'm trying to finish some pages. It's not like that. It's that I need the Quran. You know, subhanAllah, there was a period where I didn't have a sheikh that I was reciting to. And it was sort of just, I'd moved to the UK, my father was back in Saudi, and it was a bit of a, like, all over the place type of time, right? But the one thing that I stayed consistent with, when everything else, my studies, everything else was just a complete mess, the one thing that remained, I didn't hold on to it, it held on to me. It remained there with me, right? I didn't ask for the Quran to be there with me. It stayed there with me. Through all my struggles mentally, and in terms of my academics, everything. Whenever I felt some type of constraint in my chest or anything like that, the Quran was there for me. And I'd open the page and recite. It doesn't matter, subhanAllah, it's good to have a routine, it's good to have these things, but at that time, I didn't have routines, I didn't have a sheikh who was following. I just had the Quran, and all I did was open it and recite it every single day. Sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes early in the morning, sometimes in the middle of the day. Whenever I felt like I needed that outlet, the Quran was there for me, I wasn't there for the Quran. So in terms of a setback of memorization, I would say you first have to recognize the value of the Quran before seeing any sort of setback like that.
I think, in my experience, memorizing as a child, I think the biggest obstacle and setback for me was the obsession with just keep memorizing more and more and more without realizing what you're actually doing. So if you keep memorizing more and more and more, number one, without reviewing what you've already memorized, number two, without sort of appreciating the spiritual value, that spiritual connection you have with the Quran, then what you've memorized I found that eventually it did not stay in my head, and I was forgetting a lot of things. So essentially what I had to do was almost rememorize and redevelop a relation with the Quran, which has only really happened over the past 5 years. And the journey with the Quran, it's whether you're memorizing, no matter how little you memorize each day, it's a journey of a lifetime. And everyone says that the real hifz, the real memorization, it only starts after you've actually memorized something. And the struggle to keep that within your head and to keep it active, to be able to actively recall that, and finally to understand that verse and to get that into your heart, that is the real challenge.
Always many people come to me and ask me to advise him about their problems, about their difficulties. Always I give him one advice, and no one of them, but they come with different difficulties, with different challenges, but only I advise him one advice, and no one of them stay this difficulty with them. The advice is read the Quran daily and try to always pray the whole salat in jama'ah or and on time, and try to be away from prohibited things. If you try to do these three things, some of them they struggle with finding a job. Some of them they struggle with the relationship between them and their parents. Different difficulties, but only these three things. If you try to do it daily, you're gonna find, inshallah, you're gonna find it become, inshallah, easy.
I think my biggest setback with memorizing the Quran was the fact that I could have memorized. I found it very, very difficult to memorize. And I remember I spent days at a time on a single page. I was inside with my grandparents, and I remember they were asking my mom if there's something wrong with me, because I spent the whole day on one page, and it just wasn't going in. And the key thing with that setback, or with any setback that you get, is the determination and commitment that you have. Admittedly, for me, it was more of a determination from my parents than me as a child at the time. But when someone has determination, when someone has that commitment, then it's that consistency that will get you to your goal. And that's a lesson in everything in life, whether it's a gym, whether it's studies, whether it's Quran. If you're consistent and you constantly, and you never give up, and you constantly make time for it, and you constantly can have it as a high priority, then you'll be able to get through any setback that there is. And as these guys were saying, if anything, it's not really possible to have a setback with the help of the Quran. Because the Quran is the means of overcoming any setback anyway.
What was your memorizing routine like, as in like the structure of your day?
So I think there was a clear emphasis on having a relationship with the Quran and making sure you have that hub with the Quran, the alaqa. So now that we've established that we should have that type of connection with the Quran, and if we don't have that type of connection with the Quran and we're not working towards that type of connection, then looking to your health, it loses its value if you don't want to have that type of relationship with the Quran. And I myself, a lot of people mistake me for being an Arab, but I'm Indian. So I didn't even know Arabic myself. So to say that just because you don't understand Arabic, you can't access the Quran, alhamdulillah, I've been able to, through the Quran, learn more Arabic. Through the Quran, try to read the translations, and through other means as well, so trying to learn Arabic. And living in Arab countries, alhamdulillah, that's been a very good lesson. As for my routine, when I was living in the UK, I went to a madrasa for about maybe a year or two. And so I was about like 4 or 5 years old. And I'll be honest, I didn't enjoy the madrasa. I didn't enjoy it. I enjoyed Quran, but I didn't enjoy the madrasa. And I was always being put in the naughty corner. I remember it was because we were small kids. I picked a fight with a girl, and I got put in the naughty corner. I got told to stand face the wall. I think I got hit as well. But I didn't like it at all. Right? But I liked the Quran because of my parents, alhamdulillah. And like Sahib said, listen to Quran, stuff like that. Then I moved to Saudi. And when I moved to Saudi, I met one of the most amazing people I've ever met in my life, in my entire life. And that was my imam, the one who taught me the Quran. And he was the imam of the local masjid. In Saudi we have like gated communities, compounds. And there's a local masjid within that compound specifically. And he was the imam of that compound. He was quite young, he was in his early 20s. He had a family, he was the imam of the masjid, he had a job. And he's a true testification of the fact that the Quran brings barakah into your life. I don't know how, but he always found time to sit with me in the Quran. He didn't take any money for it. In fact, when we offered him money, he would refuse it. He'd say completely he didn't want to take it, so we have to sometimes just force him to take it or something. Right? And after Fajr, we do Quran together. Before Maghrib, we do Quran together. We have things like that. One of the things he did is, as part of my routine, and just to give you guys more of like some material or some type of structure that he had for me. So the first thing is, if you don't have an ustad or a sheikh, make sure you get some kind of Quran teacher. You can come up with your own routines, but oftentimes you're gonna lose your motivation, you're gonna lose your discipline. Having some kind of teacher there for you to guide you with your tajweed, with your routines, with your discipline, someone to keep you accountable with the Quran. That's the most important thing, I think, for a lot of us, because we don't have that discipline. We have a lot of things going on in our life, and we don't have that type of relationship with the Quran. We need to have somebody there to keep us accountable for the Quran. So have a teacher. As for the routine he had for me, again, like Abdul said, it's different for different people. It depends on your level of hifz. By the time I was in Saudi, alhamdulillah, I think I'd finished 2 ajza already, or maybe a bit more. So we just had muraja'a, and we had hifz. That's not what I want to focus on though. What he did is, he had a spreadsheet, and he'd have like a light green marker and a dark green marker, and then a normal pencil. And he made this spreadsheet with hifz, which is memorization, muraja'a, which is revision. And it was me and some of my other friends as well. And we'd go, and this wasn't like a madrasa, this was more just like, it was very, very chill, right? And the fact that it was so chill and it was so easygoing, that's one of the things that made me love the Quran so much. When the person who holds the Quran, he beautifies his character, and it makes other people love the Quran as a result of him. So if we recited the full page with no mistake, 3 points. If we recited the full page with maybe one mistake, 2 points. If we managed to do the page that day, but it was horrible and we need to do it again, just fill it in with a pencil, you get 1 point. And this chart would be for the entire month. At the end of the month, the person with the most points would decide where we'd go out to eat. And so we'd go out to eat at different places, that was, my study. He put a lot of effort into that. In terms of routine structure like that, it was like there was a reward at the point is there's an incentive. There was a reward at the end of it. He understood that as children we might not have that depth of understanding of the Quran yet or that appreciation of the Quran yet. So he put that effort into us. And even on a weekly basis, he would like play football with us, take us swimming sometimes. There was that type of relationship, right? So in terms of the material, that was what my general routines were like with the Quran.
From my experiences, my routine now is essentially it's the same as what my routine was as a child. It's just the amount of time that I've spent is just reduced a lot just because of time. But as Jawad said, the first thing to do is to find a teacher, find someone who knows the Quran, who can teach you tajweed and keep you accountable, who listens to you, even if not every day, every couple of days, every week. Even now, once you finish him, it's very important to keep reading to each other, because if you memorize and you only read to yourself, you memorize with mistakes, and those mistakes you will never realize that these are mistakes you're making until you read to someone and then they'll point out a bunch of things. But essentially the way we used to do it is in the morning I would learn my new verses for the day, whether it's a few lines or a page, it varies, or even now whether it's a few pages or like quarter juz or more. So that's in the morning, because generally in the winter after Fajr or in the summer after waking up, that's when your brain is generally the freshest throughout the day, and it's the best time to learn. And then you go out about your day, whether I was in school or now in uni, and then you come home, and then the second part of memorizing is to revise the past few days of your new verses. So let's say I was starting a new surah, and I would memorize the first few verses. Then in the evening I would go over from the start of the juz up until my new verses. And then the third part would be to revise a completely different section from the past. So let's say what I memorized a few months ago. And through repeating those three parts and then going to madrasa in the evening and just reading it all to a teacher, that's how you carry on memorizing, but trying to keep the past juz fresh in the mind.
Allah says in the Quran, وَمَنْ يَخْرُجْ مِنْ بَيْتِهِ مُهَاجِرًا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ ثُمَّ يُدْرِكْهُ الْمَوْتُ فَقَدْ وَقَعَ أَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ. Sometimes we try to do something but we couldn't complete it before death. But Allah said in this ayah, this show us that even if we couldn't complete memorizing the Quran before death, we will get the whole reward. Why? Because we are on the way. This is the most important thing. So don't try to memorize the whole Quran in a few years, instead of focusing on to memorize it well. So even if you sign only a few pages or 2 pages in a week, so that's enough, no problem. Because this two pages, if you master it good, if you memorize it well, that's better than when you memorize 5 pages or 10 pages, but it's gone after a week, and you will get the whole reward, inshallah, because you are on the way. So the most important thing is the discipline, that if you have it, that's the most important thing.
Bismillah. So in terms of routine, I just want to make another distinction, that I'll talk about the routine that we had as kids growing up and doing hifz. purely, number one, to inspire you, like to show you what kids are capable of doing. And there's so many kids nowadays who are going through the same routine. But number two, there's also the routine, the realistic routine that you'll have if you want to do your hifz now, as an adult with responsibility with studying. As a kid, and this wasn't just like our routine, my specific routine, this is the routine that many of the children nowadays in the madrasa today, how they do it. So as Sahib said that, in the morning after Fajr, that's when we pretty much all do our memorization. So the three things that we'd have to learn, that's the way that they tend to do in the UK. So you have something, and again the names vary. Your new work, the work that you memorized over the last few days, and something called complete, something that's just on the back. So what Jawad called Maraji'ah, we used to call Dur or Manzir, your new work would be a sabak. And what you'd have to do is that after Fajr, we'd memorize like a page. That's the standard amount. That would take like an hour or so. Then you go to school, the kids will come back, and then they'll have to read again. And then they'll have to learn the sabak qara, the munzir, the muraja'a. So they'll have to learn, they have to relearn everything that they memorized over the last few days. And then they would learn like another juz or half a juz from the back, from what they've already memorized. Let's say they've done 10 juz, then they memorize a page from the 11. And then when they come back from school, they'll revise like the last 5 pages they've learned, and then they'll learn, like relearn or revise the first juz per se. And they'll read all of that. And just like how the first teacher had a spreadsheet, so too did we. We had a chart with all 3 of those, and then he'd put a tick or a cross if we did it right, or if we didn't get it right. So that's the routine that we had as children. And that's why we were able to memorize it in 4 years, 5 years, 3 years. And that's why we were able to do it so fast. Because the entire day was basically spent on that. Anyone who has completed their hifz properly as a child, you notice that they won't have spent that much time socializing, they won't have spent that much time playing games X, Y, Z. That's not to say that they didn't, but they made that sacrifice at a young age, and you can see the benefits that they have now. Now how about us nowadays, where we have jobs, we have studying, and what kind of routine are we looking at if you want to memorize the Quran? The first thing is you don't want to clarify your intention. Why are you doing it? Motivation, you're going to lose motivation very, very quickly, especially when you look at the whole Quran and you think, how long am I supposed to memorize all 600 pages? I can barely get through one. Make sure that you learn discipline, and as part of that, have a teacher with you. Have someone who can hold you accountable, so that even on those days where you're like, I won't be able to memorize all of this, you have someone to push you. For us as children, we had our parents, we had our teacher. For you guys, find someone. If it's someone who's doing hifz with you as well, if it's a teacher, find someone who will hold you accountable. Secondly, is be realistic about how much you're going to be able to memorize. As a child, when your brains are a lot more flexible, you learn a lot easier. Even then, when you spent the whole day, because you didn't have any other responsibilities, just school and homework that no one did, and then on top of that, you had everyone around you. Then it took 3-4 years. With us in our position, if you were to memorize the Quran now, it will take at least, it depends on your journey and how much time you're able to spend, but don't expect it to take 3-4 years. See it as a journey. And then, and most importantly, is your consistency. That it doesn't matter when or where you memorize. Everyone has a different routine. We would obviously, from experience, recommend that time in the morning to memorize. But here's the 2-thing journey. Number 1 is memorizing the new things, and number 2 is revising what you've already memorized. Hifz is someone who just stores the Quran. That's what you think about, someone who stores. It's not someone who memorizes it and then just like leaves it and forgets it all. So the key thing is the consistency. Set a time in the day where you're going to be learning, and then don't compromise. And that can be whenever, we recommend after Fajr, but whenever you're free. And don't compromise on that. And then if you do that, and you have a teacher, and you structure your learning, and you have someone holding you accountable, and you have the correct intention, then inshallah, that's something that will help you with your hifz now.
What techniques did you use personally, and which ones did you not find helpful?
Repetition.
Sorry. So 2 things we've established, just to recap. Number 1, it's best to have a teacher, someone who's going to keep you accountable, and someone who's going to give you a routine to work towards that's suited towards you, inshallah. And the second thing is discipline, and making sure you put the effort into doing it every single day, and not compromising on that. As for techniques, what can I say except repetition, Sahih? It's just repetition. It's just about making sure you do it every single day, and as long as you do it every single day, you'll see the results. But that's the way it is in life with anything. You know, someone might go, I want some practical tips for how I can get buff in the gym, right? Well, bro, you can't just inject yourself or something. You're gonna have to go to the gym every single day. I want some practical tips so I can get past my exam right now. The person who spent the effort doing it every single day for that whole year is going to do much better, not just in the exam, but after the exam as well. Right? So in every single thing, the Quran is no different. It requires that type of time, it requires that type of repetition. As for specific memorization tips, then what I would say to parents Suhaib is at Fajr, that's when your mind is most fresh. So try to do, this is, say your teacher set up a routine for you. That, okay, you have to memorize this much, you have to revise this much. Try to do your memorization in the morning and try to sleep on your revision. What do I mean by sleep on your revision? What I mean is, if you've memorized it properly and you've repeated it a good amount of times, enough times, then it should be able to roll off your tongue to a certain degree. You might make a mistake here and there. But when you put your head down on the pillow and you're going to go to sleep, you close your eyes, and they say, if you listen to Quran before you go to sleep, Shaitan puts you to sleep quicker because you don't want to listen to Quran. So do that, inshallah. If you need to go to sleep, lie down, put your head on the pillow, and whatever you know, whatever your revision is for that day, try to go over it whilst you're going to sleep, right? It might even just be one surah and you repeat it over and over again. Maybe your shaykh told you do surah duha for your revision. Repeat it over and over again until you fall asleep. Do it like that. Then another thing is that the Quran, you should have times when you're focused on it and you're making sure you're disciplined and you're trying to memorize it, you're trying to consolidate it. But at the same time, it doesn't always have to be like that. It can be a passive thing as well as an active thing, right? So I know so many brothers, one of them being, I know a lot of brothers. So what they do is, the ones who know the Quran very well, anything that they're doing, if they're driving the car to university or something, that's their time to do revision. If they're walking to university, that's their time to do revision. Right? If they're doing something, they can do the Quran whilst they're doing that other thing essentially, right? So they're doing it passively as well as actively to consolidate. So you have active revision of the Quran and passive revision of the Quran. And
I think it's basically what Jawad said. So when you start, for example, when you see a verse in front of you and you okay, I'm going to try and memorize this. So you read the verse a couple of times, looking in, and make sure. A lot of people they read quietly, or they read like whispering. Make sure you read loudly, and make each vowel clear, so it goes into your head. And once it starts to flow, so you don't stumble, then you split it into words. So the first word, then once you do that, you do the first two words, then the second and third, then combine the first three. So like that, then that's how you memorize an actual verse. And when you memorize multiple verses, you do this exact same thing. Once you memorize the second verse, then you combine the first and second. When you can read that comfortably, you do the second, third, and then from the start again, 1 to 3. And this is sort of the thing the best time to do in the morning. And I'd say from my experience, when memorizing, I found that you get tired quite quickly. So like 20 minutes and then a few minutes just like rest the brain and then try again, just revise it again. And then apart from that, throughout the day, especially where we're all like working or we have uni, try and read the Quran and listen to it as much as possible. For example, when driving, just if you already know, let's say the 30th juz, but you haven't revised it in a long time, just play that and try to follow along as much as you can. Or if you're on the train, just open the Quran up, try and read from inside your head as much as you can. And finally, before sleeping, either the verse you're planning to read to learn the next day, either revise, go over that so you're familiar with it, or just read, even if it's just a few lines or a few verses of something you previously memorized. Because at the end of the day, none of us are aiming to become Huffadh in even a few years. It's a journey of a lifetime, and every little bit you do, as long as it's consistent and the quality of it is high, inshallah in the end it will all sort of combine together.
I think you face a difficulty with some pages. Try to read it before sleep, and after sleeping, try to read it again. you're gonna find it easier than before. So spaced repetition is key to, I think, especially with the difficult pages that you may face a difficulty with it. So I think spaced repetition, that doesn't mean only after sleep and before sleep, also for a week. So try to focus on these fresh pages that you have memorized recently. So that's
Bismillah. So the method that I use, or everyone uses, as I said, if you want to get something into your head, it's repetition. So let's take Surah Al-Fatiha for example. So this is the way that I do it when I teach whoever I'm teaching. Is that, so the first ayah, read it 10 times looking in. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Read it 10 times looking in. Now close it and see how much you can read without. Open it again, read it 10 times looking in, close it, see how much you can read without. Open it and do that again until you're able to read the whole thing without looking in. Then read it 10 times without looking in. Now move on to the next ayah and do the same. Once you're able to read the next ayah 10 times without looking in, come back to the first one and read both of them without looking in 10 times. And then you move on to the third one. Learn that ayah, come back to the beginning and read all three without looking in 10 times. Move on to the fourth, and so on and so forth. And that's literally how you do it. There's a brother who converted a few months ago, and doing the same thing. He's been able to start memorizing Surah Al-Mulk, and he's doing extremely well. And subhanAllah, it's not just this, but I haven't really seen this fail with anyone. That if you just constantly repeat and repeat and repeat, over time it will definitely sink in. The key thing is that you just repeat it again and again and again. And then as you go on with your hifz, you'll pick up these little things here and there, like everyone has their own way of memorizing, for example, which order certain ayahs come in, or like I associate a letter with a certain topic, and everyone has their own little thing to memorize, their own tips and tricks. But at the end of the day, it's repetition, recall, and that's it.
Well, you kind of went over this part, but the last question is, do you have any top tips for people who are looking to memorize at an older age? So mid-20s kind of thing. Joel, you can go first.
Older age. I can't speak from experience, so ask to the people who are older.
No one here is older than you, just be honest. Okay, so listen, I'll start. This is something that I've been doing as well. So in my community, local thingy, we've started this thing where a lot of the elders, they'll come and they try to prove that they really also memorize what they can. And especially with the uncles who are like in their 60s, 70s, nothing seems to go in. But subhanAllah, the key thing is that they're trying. The key thing is that they're trying. And as the Shaykh said, that if you leave and you try to do something, then you find the reward with Allah, even though you haven't completed it. Now, for people who are our age, who are 20s, 30s, you're able to memorize. You're able to memorize the Quran. And there's people at uni, one of the people I'm using Talawih with this year, he finished his hifz in med school. I know that I've heard of a sister in my year who pretty much completed her hifz in med school as well. And med school medicine is an extremely busy degree. So it's something that's definitely feasible and definitely able to do. The key thing, as I said, is that you're realistic with how long it's going to take. And number two, you're consistent with it. If you're consistent, and number three, you have a teacher and you have a routine. If you tick all those boxes, then at some point the Quran will come to you. If you tick all those boxes and you're determined and you're disciplined, and then you don't ever stop, the Quran will come to you. It's just a matter of really being able to make that sacrifice. And remember, nothing easy comes without sacrifice. What gives something its value is the sacrifice that someone's put for it. All those people who are Huffadh now, who did that as a child, they spent years not being able to watch movies all the time, not being able to go out and see their friends, and especially as a child, they don't actually understand why they're not able to do all of these things. They put in that sacrifice, and that's why they're Huffadh now, they're happy now. And it's the same with you guys. If you want to be able to be a hafiz of the Quran at some point, you need to make that sacrifice. You need to be willing to make that sacrifice. It may mean that you can't see your friends as much. It may mean that you'll have early mornings, so you'll have to sleep early, which means that you can't chill with your friends late at night all the time. whatever it is. But if you really want the Quran is one of the most valuable things you can have. You need to make that necessary sacrifice.
I'm going to give you two examples for those who memorize the Quran when they are old. The first one, I think you know the companions of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How did they memorize the Quran? Because the Quran came to them. Some of them were old, and also you know Sheikh Ali al-Hudayfi. You know him. Sheikh Ali al-Hudayfi, Medina, Mr. Nawawi. Ali al-Hudayfi, he started memorizing the Quran after he was 40. So now, mashallah, tabarakallah, he lead people in Mecca and Medina.
We got an anonymous question, which was quite nice, but did you learn to memorize and then beautify your voice? Or did it come with? So the question was, did you learn to memorize and then beautify your voice?
No, it was part of the journey. The more you recite Quran, the more composed your voice becomes. The more you listen to Qur'an, the more you try to imitate them. If the question is about how to beautify your voice, there are three things that I could say helps me. And of course the intention should be to beautify the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first one is when you're revising, recite with your chest. Don't recite from here. Don't let the sounds come from here. Recite with your chest, with passion and hope. Even if you don't understand the words, know that لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله. If the Quran was sent down on a mountain, it would have started crumbling from the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the weight of the Quran. So even if you know the weight of the Quran, then you have that type of passion when you're reciting. Recite with your chest. Even if you don't think your voice is the most beautiful voice, recite with the passion. That's the first thing. And with time, that will improve. The second thing is listening to Qur'an and trying to imitate them. And you know, classically, if somebody was trying to beautify their voice, they might take singers. They take lessons on how to like a choir and stuff like this, right? When it comes to the Quran, it's not like that, right? With the Quran, you simply just listen to Qari and you try to imitate that part, right? So for me, my favorite Qari at the moment is Sheikh Hassan al-Maliki, right? I really like his recitations, so I listen to it a lot. At one point it was Ahmed bin Fais, at one point it was Mashari. There's different Qur'an along my Quran journey which I've sort of had an affiliation with, affinity towards in terms of that, right? But no, the more you recite the Quran, the more composed your voice becomes, the more beautiful it becomes. And
yeah, I think it goes hand in hand with memorizing. Although when you say beautify your voice, the one thing is to, and the most important thing is to read with tajweed when memorizing. So that means that you don't make these mistakes which change the meaning or you make sure you learn it properly. And the second thing is actually beautifying the voice, and this is more of a long-term thing that's not specifically due to memorizing. Because especially when you're memorizing, when you're repeating things many times, you just focus on the tajweed and you just sort of put it into your head without sort of reading with the same slowness and beauty you might read when you're reading just for like the sake of reading the Quran. But at the end of the day, everyone has their own voice, their own pitch, and you just need to find a reciter that you like to listen to, and you find it easy to copy their rhythm. And reading with a rhythm also helps you remember the verse, especially the more you read. If you read with the rhythm, it helps you remember. So yeah, just to summarize, the main thing is tajweed, and then find a reciter that it's easy for you to copy the rhythm, and then try and implement that in your recitation.
That concludes all our questions. So we do have time for Q&A if you guys have time. So does anyone have a question? Oh, you guys can pick whoever you want.
want to pick for us?
You can. How do you go for it?
What order would you recommend going? Because everyone starts from just 30, 20, and 28. But when would you recommend going to
personally, I prefer to start from Al-Fatiha because this is how Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam arranged the Quran, and I think that's better because when you come to the end, your motivation will yes. So I think it's better to start from Al-Baqarah.
But also, lots of people do it differently. So sometimes people generally they memorize the final juz first, just because short surahs, you get to practice your tajweed with the surahs, and by the time you finish, people usually memorize a few more, like 29, 28, then start from the front. But I also know people who, for example, when I did it, I did 30 all the way to 6, and then I did the first 5, which now looking back doesn't really make any sense at all. So now when I'm revising, I definitely don't follow that order. I just go, surah by surah from the front. So it's up to you. If you're new starting, I personally think just a few surahs from the back, just to get used to the technique. And then if you have a teacher and you think it's start blocking all of them, but generally it's up to you.
Any other questions?
Are there any specific dua that I can have during the journey? Memorizing the Quran. Either from the Quran itself or from the Sunnah.
Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam advised his daughter Fatima radiallahu anha, يا حي يا قيوم برحمتك أستغيث أصلح لي شأني كله ولا تكلني إلى نفسي طرفة عين. I think this I will help you in your life, not only in memorizing the Quran.
I have a question. Like, you talked about finding a teacher, but where can you find a teacher for this? The question was, where can you find a teacher for this?
Where I found my teacher, because I said after I did Quran in Saudi and I came to the UK, for a long time I didn't have a teacher, and that was my fault because I didn't go out to look for a teacher. So sometimes it's as simple as looking into a community to see who knows the Quran more, who's offering to teach the Quran. When you start to seek out people who teach the Quran, there are people all around you, people Huffadh around you, people who are willing to teach the Quran, people who do it for free, people who take payment. Right now I'm doing Quran with Harun, the ISOC president, his Quran teacher. I didn't have a Quran teacher, and I was looking for him, and I just ended up doing it with him, with his Quran teacher. So I got his contact. I said, Harun's okay if I have the Quran teacher's contact, and I started Quran lessons with him. So it's about looking into community, seeing who can offer to teach Quran. Well, it doesn't even have to be in the UK. It can be even abroad. So this teacher that I'm doing it with, he's in Egypt right now. So when I did the lesson, we get Egyptian time and British time confused all the time. But yes, it doesn't even have to be in the UK. It's about looking.
After finishing, do you have any advice on how to maintain it? Because when I do one juz, it gets stronger than the other constantly.
I think the best way to maintain it, to read it in Salah, your prayer, especially in the night, because Allah sort of Zamman said, إن ناشئة الليل هي أشد وطئا وأقوم قيلا.
I think the same thing, because if you look at, even if you just do, 4 rakah, you can easily read like the quarter juz, and if you do that every day, you're strengthening a part of the Quran, and let's say you revise a different part of the Quran, like outside of Salah, you're strengthening 2 different areas at the same time. And I think generally it's an overtime, so if you learn one juz and you carry on and you finish the Quran, then you restart again. But when you restart, instead of, for example, learning a quarter juz each day, you learn a half juz each day. And then the next time when you finish the Quran, and then you restart and you read slightly more, and as you keep repeating this process, it becomes easier to remember more at once.
I would also add, try to put yourself in high pressure situations. For example, like even when you're leaving the Salah, whether it be with your your sisters, your mother, or your family, with if you're leading a jama'ah for a brother, then you have to be able to make sure that you've ironed out your hifz and you're not making any mistakes. So by putting yourself in that high pressure situation, you iron out your hifz. You really have no choice. Another thing you might do is either join a Quran competition or organize a Quran competition between yourselves with the sisters or the brothers. Say, okay, on this day, we're going to maybe set a date 2 months from now. Let's do a Quran competition for 5 ijza. Who's going to win that competition? Find someone who's qualified to be a judge for that Quran competition. Do it on Zoom. Do it in person. I mean, it's really not that difficult to do. If you can find like maybe 3 people, it doesn't have to be a whole group of people. But put yourself in high pressure situations. Or if you can hold yourself accountable and put yourself in a high pressure situation wherever you are, that's even better.
If you don't understand the Arabic of the Quran, then how do you like maintain good intention when reading it? So you're not like reading it just to finish it. Like, how do you like form a relationship with it if you don't understand
How do you form a relationship with the Quran if you don't understand the language of Arabic? The Quran can be your means of understanding the Arabic language. One thing I try to do is when I've memorized a page to a decent extent, I try to read the translation, but read the verse in Arabic without looking at the Arabic verse, but looking at the English verse and trying to know what's next by the English. So it actually builds my Arabic because I'm reading the English, but reciting the verse, right? So in that way, I'm learning more about the verse as well as revising the Quran. Other than that, aside from that, in terms of intention with the Quran, can say there's great reward in reciting the Quran in and of itself, even if you didn't understand it. But there's a greater reward in understanding it. So your intention wouldn't be flawed if you wanted to recite the Quran and you didn't understand it. But you should have the intention to understand.
Yeah, I think ultimately the intention for memorizing the Quran is it shouldn't be affected that much by whether, I mean it is, but either way it's to please Allah. And understanding the Arabic just gives an extra, it allows you to sort of delve into what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually trying to, is actually telling us through the verses. But even without understanding, there is, with that intention, you can still form a relationship with the Quran. But I don't think anyone should ever just read the Quran without trying to figure out what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us. Even there are loads of videos, small summary tafsirs of any surahs, or even there's a good series that does it juz by juz, each surah a summary of what is the main themes and the important verses. And once you do that, you'll find that number one, you develop a stronger bond with the Quran. Number two, your memorization actually becomes easier because you actually understand what's being said. So I think ultimately the intention should be to please Allah, and with all the rewards of memorizing the Quran, that should be within your intention. And number two, whether you know Arabic or not, you should all try to understand and the sort of tafsir of the Quran, whatever little it is.
We've got time for one last question, just from interest. Anybody?
I want to say one more thing as well, just about intention, because with any act of worship, there's always a lot of complexity or confusion around this topic of intention. So one advice I would give in terms of intention is, whatever affair you go into, have the most broad intention possible. What is that most broad intention? That intention is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The intention to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like a bucket that holds all other good intentions. So if you intended to get a specific reward, it's already included in the bucket of intending to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you intended to get a greater reward, it's already included in the bucket. An example, if I'm leading the salah and my intention is I want to inspire people by reciting with good tajweed and with a beautiful voice, then that narrows my reward down to just that one intention, right? So if I just intended solely to inspire people behind me, I'm only going to get the reward for that intention. Or if I intended, I want to improve my health, and that's the only intention I made, I'm only going to get the reward for that intention, for that specific intention. However, if I make the intention to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all other good intentions, possibly imaginable, are included in that one big general intention. So you get the reward for all those other intentions, so long as you intend to please Allah and you've looked into whether that thing is going to please Allah or not.
Thank you, sir.